Сегодня вместе со мной еще один Саша. Мы представляем независимый журнал и издательство «Эгалите», и, к счастью, к нам приехали наши сначала друзья по переписке, но я надеюсь, что это общение продолжится, и в том числе кооперация и дальше. И я рада вас всех приветствовать на публичном выступлении, которое будет своего рода лекцией Аллана Антлиффа, а также Кимберли Кросвелл. Очень рада видеть и новые лица, и также давно уже знакомых людей. Сегодня план таков. Сначала мы слушаем выступления наших прекрасных гостей. После каждого выступления мы оставим приблизительно 15, может быть, 20 минут, вдруг какая-нибудь дискуссия, какой-нибудь conversation будет. Я очень буду благодарна Тане, которая поможет немножко мне выдохнуть сегодня вечером, как переводчику параллельного перевода. Да? Вот, мне будет очень приятно. Спасибо тебе большое. После, я думаю, мы все можем весело подняться наверх, засквотировать бар на какое-то время и уже более в неформальной обстановке продолжить наше общение и в том числе обмен нашими тайнами, суперумениями и суперспособностями. Спасибо вам большое. Аллан?
Thanks for coming. This is wonderful to see you all. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here. Today I'm talking about, squatting art. And I was just explaining that it's not only artists who are integrating the idea of squatting into their art, but also art that actually squats. So off we go. So I'm discussing art that projects its presence into landscapes that are adjudicated by the state and also capitalism. I'm examining artists who welcome the stamp of illegality as an index of tensions that pivot on varied axes of social liberation. I'll begin with Fly, who creates zines, illustrated books, and murals. Then I'll turn to Rocky Doby, who produces posters and also plaques. And I'll end my discussion with the anti-gentrification themes in the artwork of Adrian Blackwell, all North American artists. Fly creates art in tandem with sites of enactment, focusing on do-it-yourself, the do-it-yourself ethic of New York's squatting milieu. Her art is synonymous with disruptions of capitalist social relations that squatting enacts, beginning with the violation of the landlord's proprietal claim to ownership of the property. She also foregrounds self-empowerment as a counterforce in which anarchism can grow and thrive. In her words, squatting has a lot to do with community, building by working together and helping each other. It's also about creating your own place and learning to live without the landlord. Squatting is about recycling and transforming property which has been abandoned and left for dead. It's about the DIY ethic. It's about being in control of your life. Artistically, she draws on personal experience to activate these politics through the creation and distribution of illustrated zines. Mobilizing art to, quote, spread the contagion of change, her narrations engage with moments of critical awakening, epiphanies, anti-authoritarian activism, and also the mimetic modeling of anarchism in formation or partial realization. Fly is from Toronto originally, and then she moved to New York in the 1990s, and this is the period when she was squatting. She joined a collective. that had taken over a derelict apartment building in the Lower East Side of New York. Whereas many squats are never intended to be more than temporary because of the pressures of the police and so forth, Fly's crew envisaged their squat as a home instead squat. Their plan was to put down roots, not leave. Cooperative ownership would eventually be negotiated with the city of New York. So they actually still own the building. They are in the building. They own it. But not before there were numerous struggles with officials who were contesting their right to occupy this building. And an instance of this kind of contestation has been immortalized in one of Fly's most frequently reprinted comics called Welcome to Eyeball House. It was called Eyeball House, as Fly says, and still is called that, because they were eyeballing the lines, like the floor, whether it was straight or not, or whatever, improvising. Anyway, Fly narrates exiting her house early one morning and encountering newly erected scaffolding outside the house, actually blocking the exit. Having designated this building as abandoned, New York City bureaucrats had appointed themselves as owners of the property. Just, we own it. And the scaffolding was being erected to prevent debris from the crumbling infrastructure falling down onto the pavement and people who are walking by. So the inhabitants of Eyeball House, confronted with these city workers, decided to allow the workers to proceed with erecting the scaffolding rather than trigger a premature confrontation with the city over ownership. But to underline their right to be there, to squat, Fly created a mural and installed it above the scaffolding to demonstrate, we live here. In the zine, she depicts the mural, which has a huge eye, whose iris is a door. And underneath, she emblazons home instead. Home instead. Think about that. Home instead of abandonment. Home instead of dereliction. Home instead of city property. And foundationally, home instead of homelessness. The essence of squatting as direct action. One of Fly's most striking innovations involves illustrating the intersections of consciousness and action in temporal arcs that merge past, present, and future. For example, depicting herself exiting this squat, the front door, only to be confronted by scaffolding, we have dual shadow selves in Fly's consciousness, one of which reacts with alarm. One stares at a thought bubble of a prison cell, to be specific, signifying possible arrest for squatting, a future, right? The entrapping bars mirror the entrapment of the scaffolding, anchoring this carceral future in the threatening present. Fly's other shadow self gestures towards one of the workers whose own shadow self embodies the perceived threat. And in the adjacent panel, the same worker expresses surprise, while his more shocked companion's emotions manifest in shadow. Scaffolding as imprisonment is a device for animating a critical consciousness in conflict with antagonistic social forces. In this way, Fly situates herself as an agent of resistance, giving voice to the squat she's part of. This imbues her critique with an anti-authoritarian authenticity. It anchors it in her own life experience, a strategy that recurs throughout her art. we encounter the same strategy in her commemoration of the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. As this attack began, the comic depicts her confusion merging with the traumatic fear coursing through the crowds trying to figure out what's going on. Fly was on her bike. She was going to a medical appointment at the time this happened. And there she is here. The day after the attack, she was confronted with reactive patriotism. American flags and calls for war clashed against people putting up posters of missing loved ones. Joining a spontaneous vigil in a public square, Fly was compelled to leave when the crowd broke into "God Bless America." This exercise in knee-jerk nationalism struck her as hollow, like a staged performance, and she narrates that response in the story here. Once again, Fly imbues her analysis in affective subjectivities manifest as shadow selves, revealing multiple tensions. These are emotional, selves that she's drawing here. So we have her furrowed brow, which reflects empathy with the anguish of the crowd, while her shadow self, her critical consciousness, snarls at the hollowness of default nationalism. She also depicts a policeman and his authoritarian shadow impulsively asserting control, while his better self leans back and declines to enact a disciplinary role. And here he is here. Snarl, walking away. Here Fly's anarchism clashes with the inculcated nationalism of the crowd, pulling her away from the crowd, while the policeman's emergent compassion clashes with his bullying self, decoupling for a moment from the role of enforcer. Both enact freedoms embedded in fixed experiences that are shared but differentiating, suggesting a politics of possibility that remains to be realized. Anarchist dissent finds its fullest articulation in this self-portrait that bookends the zine at the back cover. A series of questions mirror the intensification of state surveillance as Fly was experiencing it, and certainly in the aftermath of this event. There was media-stoked trauma, war mobilization, all combining with social decay, the degeneration of one's public rights, and so forth. So, masked by the stars and stripes, we have death's shadow scarring her body in an eerie evocation of state power run amok. Here. Silencing her voice while visiting further harm on a city besieged by the toxic pollution of the destruction of these towers. Like there is a cloud of toxic stuff over the city for over a week. We have nationalism choking dissent. So Fly asks, why is it getting harder and harder to breathe as I'm smothered by American nationalism? Now, in addition to squatting, Fly is also a member of an anarchist environmental organization called Time's Up. Once a month, Time's Up holds Critical Mass, an event in which bikers agitate for environmentally sustainable transformation. Riders converge at a prearranged location, and then they take over the streets for several hours. They squat the streets. Cars are forced to yield to bikers, demonstrating an alternative driving is real and attainable. In keeping with their ethos, critical mass riders have no leaders, and the participants determine the flow of the route as they pedal. Fly has created a wonderful logo for critical mass to encapsulate its direct action strategy. The imagery underlines that the rides are celebratory, their actions displacing cars through peaceful means. And Fly signals there's also a political continuum at work through this activating wheel, which emerges Time's Up riders with other assertions of the commons, notably squatting and also guerrilla gardening. The interlinkage is a joyous politics infused with mutual aid, cooperation, and spontaneity. Modeling shared values, fostering affinity across different sites of activism, Fly's biker, squatter, guerrilla gardeners engaging reclaiming social spaces for the common good. When a building is squatted, it becomes a spatial manifestation of self-empowerment, where the idea of the commons is enacted in real time. Squatting becomes a staging ground for transforming society across multiple sites of engagement, and this goes to the heart of Fly's art. In this sense, her graphics are antithetical to the privatizing dynamics of the capitalist art market, in which artworks are treated as profit-generating assets. Ensconced within the rarefied world of high finance, art functions as a token of the status quo, while Fly takes her art out into the streets. There she puts her art to work as a generative force for anarchist communities of resistance. Rocky Dobie is another artist and anarchist, creating work that's firmly rooted in the community that he's part of. In his case, he creates works on copper with slogans and imagery, which are mounted on buildings and utility poles and other places without attribution. His art addresses activist causes and the social movements he's involved with. Bolted in various locations, they squat the streets for political ends. An example is this plaque dedicated to Jim Campbell, a working class activist who played an important role in the anarchist movement over several decades in Canada. Campbell was longtime editor of a journal called Prison News Service, which forged links with incarcerated Black Panthers, Indigenous activists, and others. He also spearheaded a defense campaign of 5 anarchists who blew up a cruise missile guidance system factory, and he co-organized an international anarchist gathering in Toronto. These and other achievements merit public recognition, Dobie figured, and so he provided it through direct action, bolting the memory of his friend to a pole in a very well-trafficked neighborhood in downtown Toronto. Now, I've asked Rocky why he remained anonymous for most of his art career, and he told me that his art's always been part of something larger than himself, that he is also part of. His identity doesn't matter. What the art communicates matters. And this reply brings to mind the most famous artwork he's created, the poster that rallied people against the Free Trade Agreement for the Americas Summit held in Quebec City in April 2001. Dobie was making his living as an iron worker building corporate skyscrapers, so it made sense to imagine the collapse of capitalism through the collapse of these buildings, right? When he was asked to create Carnival Against Capitalism, tens of thousands were organizing to disrupt this summit, and Dobie's collapsing skyscraper became a perfect metaphor embodying their activism. At Quebec City, thousands of protesters were given face mask bandanas stenciled with this statement: "By becoming faceless, we show that who we are is not as important as what we want. By covering our faces, we show that our words, dreams, and imaginations are more important than our biographies. This statement captures the spirit of Rocky Dobie's art. Anonymity in the streets has always been an act of solidarity that lends itself to an expansive vision of what the art's about. It's much less about the artist, and it's much more about social change. Produced for the commons, it reproduces the commons by way of a gift that's freely given, cast out into the public as a message. While Dobie produces street art, Adrian Blackwell's output encompasses installations and sculptures, photographs, and other media. I'm using the term anarchitecture as an umbrella to encapsulate his art, signaling it involves liminal zones merging art and architecture, the built environment, and also anarchism. Blackwell's initial experiment with anarchitecture was enacted in September 1998 on a major street in Toronto's downtown. After considerable negotiations with city administrators and local businesses, he graced this location in downtown Toronto with a portable toilet. The toilet was pitched as part of an off-site exhibition piece organized by an artist-run gallery, and he committed himself to servicing and cleaning this toilet for a month. Look at the door. Prior to installation, he modified the toilet by replacing the door with a one-way mirror, so people watching the street could watch the street while they're using the facilities, like me, taking a photo. Now, at the time, the city of Toronto was encouraging condominium development in the downtown, and as part of this effort, police were given a mandate to clear destitute people from public areas. Thus, politicians and private developers found common cause in the popularization of a familiar gentrification equation: poor people equals danger. And Adrian installed his toilet adjacent to a busy corner where people who lived on the streets were cleaning car windows for money. They'd hang out when the car stopped. They'd come out, clean the windows, and then get paid a little. The local businesses had been agitating for the police to clear the corner, and one of their strategies was to deny people the use of their toilets. So what Adrian Blackwell did was he intervened on the side of the window cleaners. He provided a much-needed public service to those being discriminated against, i.e. a toilet they could use. In the process, systemic segregation along class lines and the imposition of proprietal rights on the public sphere, the street, was successfully disrupted. Use of the toilet also provided respite from intensifying police surveillance. In effect, every time a street person used the toilet, the person being watched became the watcher. A reversal of perspective that went hand in hand with Blackwell's pushback against social harassment at the behest of business interests. In the late 1990s, the City of Toronto Planning Department announced a competition to design a new public square in the heart of the downtown. An architectural firm hired Blackwell, who is a trained architect, to help develop a proposal. But he pulled out once he realized that their plans, the plans of the firm, were at odds with his own values. And this architectural firm went on to secure the commission, which gives us the square as it exists today in downtown Toronto. This new city square was a classic exercise in gentrification, promoted as a festive, business-friendly space, tightly managed and packaged for rental purposes. Accordingly, the design serves the needs of commerce. There's a prominent electronic billboard that bombards the public with advertising, and architectural features channel traffic flow between shopping destinations. The plaza is conceived as a stage for corporate-backed promotional events, and it also has water jets for crowd control and management. When the City of Toronto held a public celebration showcasing the new square's design, Adrian Blackwell decided to show up with his own plan and present it at the ceremony as a guerrilla action. His unofficial entry, his square, was informed by the idea that civic spaces should function as a commons where the public is free to express their wishes, desires, and aspirations. This might involve groups of people engaging in debates, arguments, or conflicts. The main point is that a public square should facilitate the agency of those who occupy it, as opposed to businesses that would profit off it or governments that would regulate it. He presented 3 posters that outlined his vision. The first underlined that politics are integral to the idea of public life. This gave an aerial view of the design. We got a spiraling platform that gradually descends towards a large open area in the center, and the square can be entered from multiple directions. In accord with the anarchist insight that diversity, disorder, and unpredictability are inescapable facets of social freedom, the square is free of advertising and manipulation. The second poster announced a public square is a space of conflict. Blackwell Square would welcome demonstrations and other manifestations of political conflict because it refused to impose a hegemonic notion of community on civic life. Accommodating diversity and friction, the design would facilitate freedom of action that exceeded any boundaries set down by civic or state authorities. And finally, you should have fun in a public square. A public square should be a place where people can play around, innovate. It should be a space of pleasure. It should be unbounded and limitless in terms of facilitating these activities. So following this intervention, Blackwell began pondering how he could materialize his concept of a public space. And the result was this model for a public space, a work of architecture, which can be built and taken down, erected over the years in various incarnations. This model is composed of concentric bleachers in the form of a circular ring. The ring starts at ground level, rises to a height, and then spirals gradually downward into the center. And the sculpture was inspired by anarchist decision-making processes in which people form a circle to discuss things, to engage with each other face to face and in an equitable way. The design itself generates variations in elevation that imply implied hierarchies are constantly offsetting each other. Power relations become fluid as attention shifts from person to person, from speaker to speaker. In July 2000, Adrian exhibited model for a public space at Mercer Union, one of Toronto's oldest artist-run galleries. This gallery was located in a district that had been targeted by the city for gentrification. Older apartment buildings, factories, and warehouses were being converted at a rapid pace into condominiums or upscale locations for high-tech companies. Small businesses were being forced out, and low-income people were being displaced. Well, model for a public space was on exhibit. Blackwell organized open forums in which local residents were invited to come and discuss problems arising from gentrification as they were experiencing it in real time. One participant later recalled, quote, "Many who attended had been evicted or were concerned their neighborhoods were changing into places they didn't necessarily want to live in anymore." So this work of sculpture and architecture, model for a public space, raised people's awareness of what was going on. It forged a spirit of critical engagement. It served as a site for self-empowerment and debate. The goal was to generate social antagonism, and it also succeeded in this goal. And I should add that the antagonism was very personal for Adrian Blackwell, because at the time he had just been evicted from a building not far from the art gallery where his sculpture was doing its work. The building he lived in was a former factory located on 9 Hannah Avenue. This building had evolved over decades from a rental space for storage and small-scale manufacturing into an informal residence with illegally built studio apartments, complete with plumbing and other amenities that people built for themselves as they squatted the space, in effect. After a corporation bought this building, the occupants were given 30 days notice to move out, and ironically, May 1st was the eviction day. This factory was more than a home. The interior included a huge central area that had been used for activist projects over the years, like banner making and other things. The studios housed numerous craftspeople and artists, and the creativity that had gone into making each unit entailed giving each unit a personal stamp, right? As people made their own units to suit their own needs. What I loved about the factory, Blackwell recalled, is that you could make things in it. It had 2 features that made it ideal: affordable, well-lit studio units and large open spaces where it was possible to make a mess and build large things. It was a functional utopian space. So the building was political and it was social. It was functional and it was unique, and it deserved to be commemorated. So with eviction pending, Blackwell documented 13 studios using a pinhole camera. Each photograph in the series records the individualized features of these spaces, none of which are exactly the same. Each had been built and adapted to suit the needs of those who lived and worked in them. No studio was exactly the same as the next, and they varied in size according to the amount of floor space that was occupied. Blackwell has argued that these ideal generic spaces are antithetical to the money-making conceptions of condo developers, who destroy the possibility of autonomous creative production every time they shut down a low-rent building to make way for upscale lifestyle living that is cookie cutter, determined by them as opposed to the occupants. So what he does in this series is he reclaims the activisms of these self-created spaces, where modes of living were freely configured to service the desires of the inhabitants. These are open architectural creations. They are photographically aestheticized. They project an anarchic oppositional power, a threat by example that couldn't be left alone. It was targeted and evicted by the economics of capitalism. To conclude, Blackwell attacks forces that undermine the possibility of a better and more humane world. His art is an exercise in immanence and resistance. Like Rocky Dobie and Fly, he cultivates an aesthetic of tension. This aesthetic is relational and confrontational because it fosters ruptures that draw us into the contested ground of the commons, right? That we can make ourselves. It awakens us to our own potential agency and freedom. Thank you. So Kim and I were discussing, we talk a little bit, 20 minutes or so, and then Kim does her presentation. So are there any questions for me?
Все что угодно.
Yes, please.
You mentioned before about that project that the eyeball house.
Yes.
And you said they had negotiated to stay.
Yes.
How did they manage that? I was living in Amsterdam for 2 years, and
Yeah.
there are lots of similar projects.
Yeah.
But they all end the same way, with a big eviction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in this case, they managed it through they were tenacious. And there were serious battles with the police in this district of New York over a decade. And there's a artist who is part of this movement, anarchist artist, Seth Tabachman, who did a book, an illustrated story called War in the Neighborhood, where he documents the way in which the police waged war against the squatters. And so they were so tenacious and refused to leave, and there were instances where, going back, let's see here. There were instances where they would barricade themselves in. They were getting food lifted up to them from friends. It could get really, really dramatic. Like this, home, where they they wouldn't allow the police in, and so forth. And so eventually the city relented, basically, and said, okay, we'll allow you to own the building. We give up. You can buy it from us for $1, just to pretend, that we actually are the owners, because these buildings were abandoned. And then the requirement for the squatters was to bring their building up to code, up to safety code regulations. So after they finally had their victory, they also had to continue working on their buildings to make them fire safe and things like this. So we're talking long haul here, as opposed to the model of occupy and then eventually it gets too intense and you leave. So thanks for that question. That's how they did it, I guess, by not giving up. Any other? Yes, please.
Sorry.
And then you.
Yeah. So with that in mind, are there any recent examples of tenacity in the States or Canada achieving this kind of success? And how do you think that would do in an unfortunate Trump America?
Elizabeth Street Garden in New York.
What?
Elizabeth Street Garden in New York.
Oh.
I think that's also in Lower East Side, and they've managed to reach an agreement to get it.
Oh, someone has another success story to share with you.
That's very recent. Just the past few weeks.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why I called it squatting art is because arguably I'd say that Rocky Dobie's been extremely successful with squatting the streets of Toronto with his art. So there's an instance of an ongoing project of illegality that has been quite sustainable. And with guerrilla actions, I mean, sometimes the police have gotten very upset about some of his work. One of his plaques, which was put up in support of indigenous planned protest related to indigenous blockades of the pipelines, of a pipeline route, was actually taken down by the police. They stole it. And Rocky put up another one in its place. But yeah, so it's not completely free of contestation, but nonetheless, there it is. Yeah, are there any? Yes, you had a question.
You talked about that victory with Eyeball House, but how often people can win in that battle? You know, I think it's really rare to take house to them.
Okay.
I'm asking, is it often? I don't think so. It's just interesting.
You're asking me about, is it often? Yes, I'd say it is often, actually. Like, you can go to different cities and encounter squats that have been there for a long, long time.
Okay.
Particularly Barcelona. Go there, it's quite inspiring. Yeah, if you can. Walking around Tbilisi, I see many possibilities, actually. Just saying.
We don't have actually squatting buildings here in Tbilisi. It's not a culture.
Well, it could be there is not such an intense need at the moment.
There is.
Okay.
The problem is that in Tbilisi, what we have, there are families
Mm-hmm.
who live in houses, and they're just regular families, not anarchists, not politically involved.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the poverty and the social problems that we have, they kind of squat and they leave.
Mm.
I was talking to my Muslim friends, and they were explaining if the leftists start to occupy places, they actually may be problematic for those families, and they can be removed. And there are like many families like that. This is kind of the practice that we have in Tbilisi, but not for the community itself.
Right. Well, the squats that I was discussing in New York, the people who are involved were quite diverse, actually. So, yeah, forming relationships of solidarity are definitely important. I hear that. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. There is a concept of temporal autonomous zones by Hakim Bey.
Mm-hmm.
So how temporal those squats, or how to make them more easier to replace, you know, to change the places?
Well, I think if we are working with that concept of the temporary autonomous zone, I would say Adrian Blackwell's model for a public space is that fits that in spades, because he's keyed the erection of this work around different moments in the political fabric of the city where he's erected it to galvanize people around different issues. So he's been very strategic about it, and as I've indicated, it goes up and it comes down again. So there's your temporary autonomous zone in action.
Is there any advices or life hacks how to faster change your place, Maybe you have a big bag with most important stuff with you. How to find those places and move between them faster?
I'm not really clear on your question. Could you perhaps...
Yeah, I'll try to rephrase. Хорошо. They will translate from Russian. В концепции временных автономных зон, главная идея, что вы ходите по разным местам, и у вас есть возможность, не задерживаться на них. Как я понимаю, сквоты, они требуют времени, усилий и ресурсов. Это не входит в концепцию. Как сделать так, чтобы ходить по сквотам, но иметь все самое необходимое в момент времени? Вот мой вопрос.
А можешь ходить по сквотам? Ну, в чем перемещаться? Перемещаться. То есть, условно, когда ты один сквот перестает условно работать, или люди условно, ну, людей выселяют, и ты можешь переместиться в другой сквот?
Да, или когда этот сквот атаковать начинают, ну, нарушители какие-то, нам нужно переместиться. И сделать это максимально быстро.
Okay, I'll try to explain that.
Yeah, я не понимаю.
Well, so as I got it, the idea of like this autonomous like spaces
Yes.
is that it makes it much easier in term, like in case if one squat is like evicted or if the one house is evicted, then people can very quickly like just transfer the resources, or like they can just go to the other space without like for, I guess, in order to have, I don't know, like resources to help that people who are evicted, or just, you know, like as a space to go. So and as I understood, the question is how to make squats like more like movable. Yeah, like mobile. Like how to do that. In my honest, okay, that's just a question. And
Well, sadly, I think of the squatting of the homeless in Canada. The predominant mode of squatting is pitching a tent. That's mobile. And it's also pathetic. I mean, in terms of that is your home, right? Particularly in Canada, where it gets kind of cold. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say.
Yes. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay.
sorry.
Hello. Thank you so much. I only knew Fly's work from Slug and Lettuce, so you know I wasn't aware of much of her other stuff. So thanks for that. But the question I want to ask was how this, if we look at it from an architecture point of view, for instance, how destruction of skyscrapers be an anti-capitalist goal. And a few months later, it would turn into something that provokes nationalist feelings. And obviously, I think most views of how space should be organized is low floors, like I don't know William Morris style, or I don't know, even if we're speaking about the psychogeography approach, then they also walked through low density neighborhoods to drink and whatever the situation is. So how can you square all that? How or is this dialectical tension supposed to be there from the get-go? Thank you.
So you talked about the destruction of skyscrapers.
And a few months later, the very same act was.
This is pre the planes going
exactly.
in. Yeah.
Like how all this art works within contexts, because if we take it out of context, then we wouldn't understand how the same symbol,
Right.
the same image, for instance, it has very different meanings.
Yeah.
Opposite meanings.
Right. In terms of the intentionality of the people who are destroying the tower. Yeah, it's an amazing image. I mean, it prefigured, an event that became associated with it by proxy kind of thing. But at the time, the planes hadn't flown into the towers, and the 60,000 plus people who are going to Quebec City to shut down the summit, the Free Trade for the Americas Summit, took this as a very positive image of their rebellion and so forth. And there's slogans and so forth around the periphery which speak to that. So it articulates an antithetical politics to the politics of terrorism. Yeah.
There were clouds of toxic dust all
Yeah.
over the city
Yeah.
for weeks, and people died of cancer just from that.
Okay, so people also died for that. It's clearly not about the building.
Yeah, but a skyscraper is more environmentally friendly than
Okay. This is an extremely esoteric and particular kind of conversation that we could have afterwards. Oh, there was another question.
So I was curious, as you mentioned before, many people who do squatting, they address this as recycling in
Yes.
urban scale. So, but however, they often face some resentment from outside, and it turns into rebellions and turns into protests, etc., etc. And I was curious. So basically, when they say that it's about recycling, it means that they take an abandoned building and they want to get it back into urban life. However, it always turns out to be for the communities to be a bit left out and outsiders. And I was curious, in your opinion, is it a responsibility of the squatting community to try to revitalize the building in terms of trying to make it more popular and social, or it should be the community who should be more welcoming and trying to include the squatting area back into urban life so that it could be not like a spot that like most people just try to avoid and other people try to use, but a more just I don't know, more accepted part of the town and just more.
Well, if you're ever in that part of New York, the squatters actually set up a museum, like a space to talk about how they reclaim the buildings and so forth, to inspire people. And to mark their presence in the neighborhood. So yeah, it's they didn't aspire to be conflicting with the neighborhood they're a part of. They're actually, in a way, saving it from complete dereliction. I guess oh yes, please.
Thanks a lot for the lecture. I just wonder about the geography that is closer to the place we are currently now. So like from this part of the Atlantic and from this part of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, when you travel across such countries as Georgia, like for the lack of another term, like post-Soviet countries.
Sure.
Do you gather examples of some successes? And how do you gather this? So do you engage with some artists directly, or you study some periodics or whatever? So like, what is your method of research in terms of finding the successful cases, if they are not like really close to you in the area where you live?
Yeah. Well, this is, I'm completing a book right now called Aesthetics of Tension, where I'm focusing specifically on anarchist currents in contemporary art in North America, partly because I have insight by virtue of being part of the anarchist movement in that region, and also just knowing it, you know. And I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about there. Where if I go to another spot, I have a lot of learning to do. Part of the excitement of speaking here, of course, is the after party where I can learn from you, and yeah. So that's generally how I do things. I mean, I also write about past art in Europe, like early 20th century and so forth. That involves so much intense research in archives and things like this. You know, I do my work in that way. I'm just here in Tbilisi for the first time, so I look, perhaps there's some artists here who want to chat with me about what kind of work they're doing. I'm interested for sure. So I think I should yield the floor to Kim. Is there someone who can help us with changing things?
It will appear here as I get it. Excuse me. I got a bit of a head cold, so I have a bit of a cough right now. I want to thank the two Sashas for your very wonderful hospitality.
Our pleasure.
You've been very kind to us. It's been a wonderful experience to come to Tbilisi for the first time. And I'm really excited to be speaking here with everyone tonight and to get to know you all. My topic is a little bit more abstracted than Allan's. I am speaking about art collectives, and this work is something that I've been focusing on as I completed my PhD dissertation, which is now done, and I am now turning it into a book. So I shall share this with you. Today I will be speaking to my research on shared leaderless leadership practices in 3 anarchist and anti-authoritarian activist art collectives. They are World War III Illustrated. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time reading here. A Radical Comic Anthology Collective, the Just Seeds Artist Cooperative, an interdisciplinary printmakers distribution co-op, and Submedia, a video news satire and documentary collective. These collectives are prominent in the field of activist art and are unsurpassed in their quality of work and durability. Just Seeds has lasted 26 years, Submedia for 31, and World War III Illustrated for 45 years. In a world that is perhaps cynical about collectivity, I asked myself, what is the key feature behind their longevity? From an art world perspective, collectivity is practically unimaginable. For example, Séverine Marguin, a labor sociologist researching artist collectives, demonstrates that within the art world bound by capitalist market forces, collectivity is marginalized. Instead, the art world prizes individualism and the centrality of the art star as a commodification personality. Art duos find favor as a collective grouping. However, groups of 3 or more artists are generally discriminated against. In the art market, individualism is the structural foundation of exchange, from art sales to copyright, making collective authorship nearly impossible. Thus, Marguin demonstrates that despite art world talk of collaborative relationships between artists, collective art practices in the dominant cultural field of the dealer-critic system are barely existent, and only a small minority of collectives gain recognition, less than 1% in some instances. In other words, artist collectivity is rare. But what of alternative avenues for distributing collective art? Within the context of the activist art collectives I am studying, recognition from capitalist art institutions is of little concern. Instead, the secret to these groups' longevity is that they institute themselves by creating cooperative mechanisms to distribute and publish their work. So how do they do it? Unique to the ongoing practices held by these three organizations is how anti-hierarchical values inform their model of leadership style. One might say it is a form of leaderless leadership, which by its very nature is collaborative, fostered by an understanding of shared agency that I have distilled into 4 causal properties. These 4 properties were determined by codifying data obtained through a series of semi-structured interviews with collective members, which were then analyzed using retroductive logic, that is, a logic of inference based upon pattern recognition. The first property is anarchy, or anti-hierarchical relations, also known as equality. Equality informs the development of the causal property of affinity, or reciprocal co-identification. Affinity is the building block for the third causal property, collective autonomy, a model for collaborating and identity building framed by practices of seeking resolution through unanimity on one hand and defining resistance to unfreedom on the other. Finally, putting it all together, the 4th causal property of shared leaderless leadership is cooperation or mutuality. This is achieved by participatory engagement and sharing responsibilities. With these properties combined, the activist art collectives under study institute themselves by creating cooperative mechanisms to distribute and publish their work by infusing shared leadership and power with anti-hierarchical values. A profound sense of equality, or anti-hierarchy, aka anarchy, is the foundational causal property of shared leaderless leadership. This is not to be confused with an ism or an ideology, but rather understood as a form of egalitarian self-rule, practiced in reciprocal relationship to others. In refusing to govern others, emphasis shifts focus from individuals to establishing leadership practices across a situation. What is generated is leaderless leadership, a term I draw from its usage by the anarchist urban planner Colin Ward, to encapsulate a leadership model wherein creative groups follow the best idea emerging from processes of participatory action. Ward's bottom-up style was theorized in opposition to hierarchical leadership models that contrived to ensure those who did not assume the mantle of leader remained passive and inert. Instead, Ward argues that in a free society, i.e. anarchy, groups spontaneously and harmoniously work out their own needs in ways that a superimposed leadership could never achieve. Emphasis on interpreting leadership situationally as a matter of shared agency, a social process that connects individuals horizontally, has also been theorized as distributed leadership by Peter Grön and as practices of leaderful intersubjective relating by Joseph Raylin. I draw from Raylin's concept of leaderful practices as distinctly additive qualities shared by all, and appreciate how his approach highlights a more democratic turn, insofar as leadership is practiced on a concurrent and collective basis. However, my emphasis falls on Ward's usage as leaderless. He offers a structural analysis key to an anarchic lens, which examines the power dynamics of cooperating without a boss. In my research, the Just Seeds Artist Cooperative demonstrated their primary feature is their assertion of anti-hierarchical relations. As a highly decentralized organization with members spanning across North America, Just Seeds membership largely participates in their distribution co-op by selling their artwork through their website. Some members volunteer to facilitate special projects such as portfolios, exhibitions, or books. All agree one member assumes the role of shop manager, a paid position located in Pittsburgh. This role, a combined membership and employee position, does not entitle the manager greater importance only greater responsibility for, and therefore greater knowledge of the business. Thus, Just Seeds is leaderless, not because of a lack, but because those who take on responsibilities or assume initiating roles do not lay claim to authority. In other words, the cooperative operates upon a mandate of stewardship, a power-moderating leadership style. Stewardship is leadership in terms of care and control, but the influences enumerated under this function demonstrate a tendency to diffuse power, replacing it with horizontal, anti-authoritarian relational values. In internal organizational practices, some Just Seeds members assume coordinating roles, but there are no bosses, which sometimes results in an uneven distribution of responsibilities. Coordinating positions emerge through participatory actions in service to the whole group, not by decree, which also holds equally true whether member projects are volunteer-based or paid. Coinciding with anti-hierarchy is the development of affinity. Affinity is the effective attribute of attraction between individuals that fosters reciprocal relations. I defined it as co-identification between people, a factor that leads to the evolution of shared agreements and goals made in response to production pressures involved with the creation and distribution of activist art. In my model, affinity is represented by the tight-knit news satire and educational documentary video collective Submedia. Operating on the model of an artel, an economic association of craftspeople, Submedia's membership is divided between Montreal, Quebec, Hamilton, Ontario, Asheville, North Carolina, and Brazil. Like Just Seeds, they institute themselves as an artist collective seeking remuneration from their public for their work, concentrating on crowdfunding and merchandise sales. However, most members subsist on part-time work, and only one member is a full-time video activist. Submedia's main work is producing video and audio content, work that is not divided into specialist tasks but shared between the members of the crew. The key feature of Submedia is their value of skill sharing, which is ongoing and ensures everyone learns how to do everything. It acts as insurance for collective continuity while also facilitating better informed collective decisions and goals. Thus, leadership within Submedia follows what is known as distributed leadership. As theorized by Peter Grahn, distributed leadership is founded on the creation of role interdependence that emerges when a group divides agreed upon technical and social tasks to coordinate leadership sharing. Although Submedia's internal agreements allow for a measure of specialization according to time availability, talents, and interests, the collective has routinized skill sharing to such a degree that they are easily assured of interchangeability in roles and functions. This exercise in anti-hierarchical relations has led to an interesting affinity-based form of collective action Grahn identifies as conjoint agency. Rather than attribute leadership to specific roles, Grahn recognizes leadership qualities as spontaneous collaboration, intuitive relating, and structural and institutional agreements that encourage distributed action within groups. Between conjoint agents, a synergy is produced. And this follows a cyclical pattern Grahn labels reciprocal influence, or the accumulative effect of stimulating influence between agents. That is, the relationship with peers evolves into mutually beneficial cycles of support, action, and reaction across multiple actors. Thus, reciprocal influence is a situated affinity of co-identification that extends the dynamic of collectivity into Submedia's shared leadership and activist art practices. The primary leadership function that arises within Submedia is collective steering, the shared directorship of creative productions, where individualized contributions take a back seat to the content. Exemplifying this is the robot character DDoS, who in many ways personifies Submedia's collectivity, embodying their semi-anonymous collaborations. After finding affinity, the third causal property to emerge is collective autonomy. Collective autonomy has two parts: the freedom to arrive at agreements, also known as unanimity, and B, the resistance to unfreedom, defined as shared alternative economics. Each of these three collectives have unique ways of maintaining these two factors, but today I will focus on how World War III Illustrated manages its collective autonomy. World War III's editorial members are largely located in and around New York, and they self-organize into autonomous rotating editorial boards, through which they assume responsibility for publishing an annual comic anthology. These editors draw on submissions, provide mentorship to contributors, and assemble each book collectively. Together they decide on cuts and inclusions in a highly deliberative and decision-making processes which depend on the makeup of the editorial board. Past patterns have resulted in the women-led boards deciding by consensus, and mixed-gendered or male boards favoring voting. Next, World War III's collective autonomy as resistance to unfreedom manifests as a volunteer economy. Practicing a politics of refusal, all exchanges in World War III are voluntary and free of monetary value. Neither editors nor contributors are paid. Instead, an economy of free creative labor has ensued. Contributors gain recognition for comics unpublishable under the thumb of corporate interests. Editors, who are also participating comic artists, gain relationships mentoring new artists in profound respect. A model of seniority known as sweat equity has developed. Sweat equity, a phrase introduced to me by World War III artist Seth Bachman, is a term taken from the American squatting movement. It refers to an intangible measure of trust that develops when someone contributes their labor to a project, and is founded on respect for experience. Within the context of World War III's shared leadership, sweat equity provides a layer of empowerment that plays out through alternating practices of unanimity. The final causal property of shared leadership is cooperation as mutuality. It emerges as a factor of sharing responsibilities, the main property of cooperation within shared leadership dynamics. Sharing responsibilities as an individual and an interpersonal practice that combines it to effect and produce collectivity within a larger collaborative unit. Interestingly, in collectives that either paid everyone like some media or no one like World War III, responsibilities were reportedly shared across a larger number of participants. Additionally, specialist tasks may have landed on certain individuals due to expert knowledge and/or geographical site constraints. As such, sharing responsibilities is not necessarily a factor seeking some pure ideal of labor equality. It is more relevant for those who share their strengths for the good of the whole to do so and not worry too much over the differences. From mutually sharing responsibility emerges a shared sense of ownership. In the anarchist tradition, ownership is not the same as property, which, following the anarchist economist Proudhon, is exploitative. Property is created when the product of the labor benefits the proprietor, not the creator or the worker. In opposition to this, Proudhon's anarchist economics socializes ownership into collective property, wherein all share the means of production. The division of labor is self-organized at the workplace. Those doing the work choose their managers from within their ranks. As the practice of sharing responsibilities divides labor, we can extrapolate that the collective ownership that results in sharing the work is both a means and an end towards creating a society of possessors without masters. Thus, we have come full circle to defining a shared, participatory, leaderless leadership first theorized by by Colin Ward. In today's organizational work and educational environments, it is impossible to be able to balance values of equality and actions measured by initiative-taking, resourcefulness, and dedication. Anti-hierarchical, leaderless leadership practices are the creative fruit of people working well together to produce and deliver their art and media in their publics in a cycle of radical cooperation and mutuality. Cooperation teaches people to rely on each other in situations ranging from opportune to challenging to adverse. This reliance, shaped by the practice of sharing responsibilities, is founded upon commitment. With commitment comes shared ownership and ideally shared leadership propelling projects into the future. Thank you.
question. I'm artist and I have a few fans, and I decided to organize our own anarchist project. I don't know how to explain it, but I want to share my knowledge with my few new friends, and they are my fans. And I want to organize starting with. I want to be not one leader, but I have important skills to share with them, and how I can organize it. Maybe maybe I should share a few roles for my students, or can you advise me something in this case? How I can organize these 5 peoples?
Okay, so you are with a group of 5 people.
Yeah.
And what is the nature of this group? Is it you and some students?
I am an artist.
You're an artist,
Yes,
and
and they're my fans, and I want
they're-
to teach them to draw.
so you want to? I would suggest you start a skill share.
Yeah.
Do a skill share where you arrange yourself in a circle and share ideas of how to draw, and then everyone can try drawing together.
Yeah.
And then everyone can make ideas of how they experience drawing, and bring it forward, and they can talk about how they experience the drawing together. So everybody can get a chance to share the experience of drawing and share their insights on what they learn.
Okay.
That's what I would suggest.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. I think it's turned off.
A bit closer.
Yes. Okay, so I was really interested by the term sweat equity that you mentioned. Sweat equity.
Yeah.
Not sweet. And it really caught my attention, and I understand that there was not enough time to like explore every term thoroughly, but maybe you can tell us who coined in this term, or where can we read more about with this sweat equity?
Yeah, so sweat equity was introduced to me by Seth Tabachman. And Seth Tabachman is part of the squatters movement in New York. And he wrote a comic called War in the Neighborhood that Allan referenced. And they talk about sweat equity as a way of paying with your labor. So you contribute to a project through your labor because you don't necessarily have money. So, but you contribute with your talents and your skills and your abilities, and in so doing that you develop trust with the people around you. And you develop and that's your equity, because people start to trust you, and they know that you are invested in the project because you are putting so much time and energy into it. Does that explain it enough to you? Yeah. So look up just look up sweat equity on the internet, and I'm sure something will come up.
Thank you for the lecture. Just wonder about the collectives that you mentioned. So you pointed out the longevity of of them, and probably the first one, like the short-lived one. But so the latest is like 2013. So did you study any more recent examples? And also, as for the nature of this collective, so these are like magazines, and or do they go online? So like in terms of, probably in case of the last one, yeah, so, well, maybe any more recent examples.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I have two numbers here, because and two numbers here and two numbers here, because some of these collectives were founded by a single person, and then they were reformed into collectives, into a group. So this in 1998 was formed by a single person, and then it was codified as a collective in 2007. But Just Seeds was going on since 1998. Submedia was codified in 1994, but then turned into a collective in 2013. And they're still ongoing. This is a comic book collective. They do comics. These are printmakers and street artists. And this is a video collective. I'm currently working with a hip-hop collective, and they just got together a couple of years ago, and they're my newest collective, and so they're more very recent. But they do video and hip-hop and lyrics, so I'm going to be analyzing their lyrics and their rhythms and their poetry. But I've been mostly focusing on they would be the youngest collective that I would be working with. I've been mostly focusing on the ones that have been around for more than 20 years. Thank you for your question.
Can I ask a question about shared responsibilities? When you mentioned that we need to divide the work and rotate the responsibilities, and this is the leaderless leadership kind of thing that we can do. What if in collectives people decide that one person or two people want to take responsibility for a specific thing, and someone wants to do something else because maybe they don't have interest or they don't have the skills and they also don't want to learn? What is your opinion on this?
Well, I think depends on how stable the collective is. If the collective is really dedicated and stable, then you can manage that. But if somebody leaves and they take away their skills and their access to what they're doing, then you have a gap when if somebody who has that skill suddenly goes away. It's better to be able to be interchangeable and have multiple people able to do the same thing if possible, so that if somebody leaves, then you can at least fill that gap easily. It's harder when one person has all the passwords to all the accounts. For example, if 2 or 3 people have all the passwords to all the accounts, then at least then you can share them a lot easier, if you get what I'm saying. I understand that with important things, particularly with specialist skills, if you have somebody in a group that who's really good with math and is doing all the finances for the group, that's a specialist skill that is really important to have, and that is not easily transferable. So to have somebody in that position, that position tends to stay that person's responsibility for a longer time. As opposed to something that is like social media, where if that person, someone else who does social media for a group, that can be transferable very easily for somebody else. Multiple people can take on that role. But some skills are so specialized that you do need to have special. You need to have special training for it. And so you have to plan for a longevity planning. You have to plan for your transition. So if the first thing I was told when I was started in collectives is, okay, you're now in our collective. Now you have to train your replacement. You have to think about who's going to come after you, and who are you going to train to take up your work when you go. And so it's your responsibility not just to do the finances, but to also train the next person who can do the finances. Yes, of course.
One thing that I'm facing in the collectives that I'm part of is people join, but they're just there and not that doing that much. It's just them being present there, and since it's also unpaid job, you can't push anyone to get involved, to participate, and how to also navigate through all this.
That's a tough one. You have to create a culture in the collectives. The culture. You have to create a culture of expectation of certain things that need to be done, and capitalism comes at you in sneaky ways. And one of those sneaky ways that it comes at you is says, "Oh, I'm a volunteer. I don't have to work." But that's how capitalism teaches you to not do anything to fight against capitalism, because I don't have to work for it. I'm just free and easy. I'm a volunteer. I don't have to work. But I always say you have to do double duty. You have to do work. You have to do double duty if you're fighting capitalism. Your volunteerism, you're there because you want to make a difference. Are you there because you want to look cool, or are you there because you want to make a difference? And you have to create a culture that values making a difference.
On the process of creating the culture, we are becoming dictators, like pushing hard.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard because you're not going to reach everybody. You're not going to reach everybody, and especially the young ones who are still discovering themselves, and they don't know where they are. But I always just try to lead by example. I don't tell people to do things. I show them what needs to be done by doing it. And then I ask them, do you want to join me? But I would never boss anybody around. I would say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you want to help? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to ask if you reckon that anarchism is the only political philosophy that can, this shared leadership concept can be discussed within. Because, for instance, some aspects like resistance to unfreedom, they are also shared with republicanism or some strains of liberalism. So why specifically this anarchist this stress on anarchism? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My stress has been both anarchism and anti-authoritarianism. And so when I use the word anti-authoritarianism, that's more of an umbrella term, because that captures more people who have anarchist adjacent leanings, but they don't necessarily identify as anarchists. I am interested in studying anarchism more than left libertarianism, more than social democrat. Those don't interest me at all. So this is why I am studying the anarchist side of things. So I do acknowledge that there's a lot of liberal lip service paid to freedom or resistance to unfreedom, but I don't know to what degree they're actually it's actually serious about it if it comes down to it, because I think there's a lot of oppression in liberal politics, even as it stands today.
Questions? Just to build off of their question, how is conflict resolved or dealt with in shared leadership or leaderless leadership?
I would suggest that would be very, as it were at any other organization, with care and sympathy and with a great deal of communication. In Just Seeds, I asked about conflict in each of these organizations, and Just Seeds talked about avoiding conflict, and that was a mistake. They talk about that as a big lesson that they learn, is never avoid it, and that if they were to do anything different, they would change that, and that's what they've been working towards, to learn how to deal with conflict. Submedia talks about doing very intense one-on-one conversations with each of the collective members, and then maybe bringing in a second collective member and having mediated conversations. But they have very intense one-on-one conversations with mediated support conversations. And that's how they manage their conflict. And World War III didn't really answer my question when I asked about conflict. So so I can't answer that one about them.
Yeah, I have kind of the similar question, but another tough one is a consensus. So how to reach a consensus? And have you heard about consensus handbook? Or could you recommend something more advanced?
Yes, I've heard of the Consensus Handbook, and it's recommended reading all throughout where we're from. As far as another book, I'm not too sure what to recommend. Yeah, it's better in practice. It's better just to do what you're doing and just keep practicing it. One of the things I've noticed with consensus is, as long as you have a good facilitator in the group, the facilitator makes it all the much easier, and it makes it much more smoothly, and take turns facilitating.
Yeah, any tips except facilitator, maybe agenda, timings, and so on?
Yeah, always have an agenda prepared and written out explicitly, and then the facilitator can follow the agenda, and then everyone can have their turn saying what they need to say, and then the facilitator synopsizes. And then as the discussion gets deeper, the facilitator has to keep repeating synopsizes over and over again, and then ask everybody, does it sound like we are reaching a sort of consensus? Does it sound like this is what we are thinking about? Where does it sound like we are reaching this conversation? And it's just always checking in with everybody. And so I think the role of the facilitator is the most important role.
Oh, thank you.
When we make a decision, we should aim to have everyone's votes, or majority of people should agree, or it's up to us to decide how we want to do it.
It's up to you. Basically, in my practice, we're in the collective that I'm a part of, we have agreed to have full consensus. But some groups will have 50% plus one, and that's agreed beforehand. So, but it depends on the group.
I don't have a very defined question, but I will try to do it while I'm talking. So we have many different collectives, and I feel sometimes that collectives, I don't really like the idea of collectives being autonomous. I also like them communicating to each other and building some sort of more larger movements, or maybe sharing also skills between the collectives. I was part of a collective, and we would sometimes invite some other people from other collectives, so we can also share, because as you said about even mediating conflicts, how different collectives have different perspectives on that. So maybe my question is more how we can bring different collectives, maybe with sometimes different perspectives in the larger movement, and how maybe when it comes to your collective, how often do you also communicate to other collectives? Yeah, that's the question.
That's an excellent question, and that actually reminds me of the previous question about do you have a book? I just remembered a book. It's called Anarchic Agreements, and it's edited by Ruth Kinna. And it's a really small book, and it talks about coalitions, which is exactly what you are talking about, creating coalitions between collectives. The first half is about collectives and making agreements within collectives, and then it talks about making agreements between collectives and how those work is an intercollective dynamic, so how you can operate in a federation of sorts. And so I highly recommend Anarchic Agreements as a book to read.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
More questions?
Okay.
Excluding someone from the collective and how to do it. Yeah, it's also very tricky.
How to dismiss somebody?
Yeah.
Oh, it's very hard. If you can get a dismissal process together before actually having to enact it, that's the best. So if you can get some sort of exclusion process down and confirmed before you actually ever have to do it.
I don't get it.
In advance, make a document or something collectively that says this is what happens, this is how we dismiss someone before that even comes up.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can do it in advance and get your process together in advance before excluding somebody, that's the best. Because if you have to do it at the time of somebody being excluded, it's very messy. And it can mean people leaving the collective and people taking sides, and it could be pretty unhealthy for everybody. In my collective that I'm a part of, we have something called Safer Spaces. And Safer Spaces is a working group within the collective that makes sure that everybody feels supported and safe within the collective. And so they have a measure of trust within the collective, and they work very hard to make sure all of our communications are really good with each other. And that we are trusting each other. But when somebody who is malicious or has bad intentions and needs to be booted out comes along, you have to be prepared for that in advance if you can. And if it happens too late, then it's really, really hard. Yeah.
I was really interested to hear how you can create this culture of expectation of things to be done. And you said that like one method of doing it is like leading by example. But I'm also interested in, do you know what methods, what else can we do to create this culture of things to be done when a lot of people in this leftist anarchist communities and collectives, they treat this work as something that they don't want to push because they oftentimes people say like, oh, it's so capitalistic to expect me to be effective or something.
Okay. I'm a part of an anarchist bookstore and an info shop, and we had to write a zine about why we're not capitalists. Why what we're doing is not capitalism, because nobody profits off of what we're doing. And because people were making assumptions consistently. And part of it is trying to fight this assumption that if you have a work ethic, you're a capitalist. And that's not true. If you want to change the world, you have to work. You have to make change. It's not going to happen if you're just sitting down watching TV. So another way, other than leading by example, would be inspirations. Finding inspiration. What inspires you? What moves you to do something that makes the world a better place? What moves you to share your ideas with other people that will also get them inspired? That's another way I would approach it, through inspiration. Pardon?
Is it Black Rose Book, the bookshop that you're working at?
The bookshop is called Camus Books.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Didn't know about it. Thank you.
Yeah, speaking of exclusion, how to interview people and accept them in your community. Interview them, like to meet them, understand their values, ideals, and so on. Do you have any like algorithm written?
We have a basic set of interview questions for the bookstore. And this basic set of interview questions is designed to test the person for values and test whether or not they will be compatible with us, but also maintain our ability to be inclusive and to be open to differences.
Any cases when you didn't invite someone?
We do say no. We don't say yes to everybody. We say no to people who obviously do not fit our principles of unity. So one of the most important things to have in a group is a principles of unity, which lists out your principles of what you value and what you deem are important. And when you have these principles, you can always reference them. And if somebody does not agree with them, then you can also exclude them very easily. And that's just a matter of right there, oh, you don't agree with our principles. That's easy. The other thing is like there are ways of asking questions that everyone will say yes to all the time, but there are ways of asking these questions where you know that, oh, that could be something to ask an after question, like maybe this needs a follow-up question, and that has proved to be very good for us to also say, okay, oh, this question it rose a red flag. We need to do a follow-up interview, and that helped us as well. We have done that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
We call it volunteer support.
Anybody else? Yeah? Okay. Sorry.
Is that okay to ask?
Oh, please, yes.
So I don't know if this is maybe a bit off topic, but since we're here discussing anarchism, I think it's important to note that in some collectives there is infiltration, and you never know when someone infiltrates your community to give this data about what you're doing to the cops. So do you have any like protocols, any ideas on what to do to, I don't know, to understand in time before the person comes into the collective, or if a person has already become a part of a collective and you kind of have some assumptions, some ideas that maybe this is infiltration, what do you do?
That's a very good question. I think you have to know security culture protocols. Have you heard of security culture? Security culture is a way of communicating and not communicating within your collective with only trusted people. So in security culture, you do not speculate about actions. You do not talk about actions. You do not name people's names. You don't say certain things under any circumstances with security culture. And that becomes a rule amongst the entire group. And that becomes the norm. And security culture also includes like over email. It also includes over other internet channels. And you just have to study best security culture practices in order to stay safe. There was I can't remember the title of a zine that was about that. It's called Courageous and Security Culture Practices for Activists or something like that. Stay Courageous, I think it was called. But it's a good zine that is really good about activists and ways to stay with good security culture. But you just have to be aware of what you're saying and who's saying what. And if somebody is saying things that kind of give you a red flag, then you be aware of that.
Еще совсем недавно на автономе выходила. Если хотите, вы можете написать в телеграм-канал Эгалите, что вы ищете зин, мы вам просто пришлем ссылку. Совсем недавно переводили очень хороший зин на тему как раз культуры secure culture. Там очень здорово описывается, что такое протоколы, как их внедрять, как их изучать, и другие ссылки на другие источники. Так что contact me, please. Anyone else? Or we can just start after party. Thanks to Allan, Kimberly. Thank you so much. Маленький анонс, прежде чем мы пойдем все сквотировать бар. К сожалению, или какой-нибудь другой бар найдем и пойдем его сквотировать, вот, который будет абсолютно non-profit или еще что-нибудь в этом роде. Скорее всего, я сейчас веду переговоры с баром Revolution, чтобы 4 июля снова встретиться уже с Алланом и Ким в более неформальной обстановке и пообщаться на куда более специфическую тему. Аллан хотел рассказать про невероятную группу людей, своих друзей, которые сделали то, что было бы неплохо делать в какой-то момент нам. В общем, спасибо большое. Именно саботаж. Да. А еще также будет QA. Какого числа? 3-го? Да.
Okay. Да, и еще маленький анонс. 3 июля, в четверг, будет мероприятие, которое называется «Анархистский Q&A». Оно пройдет в Secret Place в 7:30. Это мероприятие, где вы можете прийти и написать любой вопрос, интересующий вас по теме анархизма. И этот вопрос будет зачитываться. И, соответственно, зал, там нет экспертов, нет эксперток, зал будет отвечать на эти вопросы, и вы сможете собрать так разные мнения и рефлексию. Спасибо.
Скажу, что в прошлый раз это было просто прекрасно и неимоверно. Ну что ж, спасибо вам большое, еще раз спасибо аудитории, еще раз большое спасибо, Кимберли, thanks much, to Allan. Давайте оставаться на связи и, пожалуйста, оставайтесь свободными.